Alright, today we're going to talk about properties of real numbers. You will have heard of every single property that we talk about today, but we're going to kind of talk about them all at the same time. So it's just a review, okay? So there'll be a lot of words, we're going to give examples of things, and then that is about it, okay? Now we did talk about the distributive property last week, so we're not going to have the distributive property up here as one of our things. So properties are rules used to rewrite and compare expressions. That's kind of what the definition of that is, but we don't really need to write that definition. So the first word that I would like for us to write is the associative property. The associative property. And after it, I'm going to put of, addition, and multiplication. Okay, because it's the same rule whether it's addition or if it's multiplication. I don't think we need to write it twice. Raise your hand if you've heard of the associative property. Not very many people. Of those people that have heard of it, does anyone remember what it is? Rachel. Look, so something changes, though, about it. Okay. Do you know what? The parentheses. All right. So, associate. I'm sure at some point in your life, an adult has told you that you shouldn't associate with someone else. That means hang out, okay? Hang out. So, we're going to talk about numbers hanging out together and being in groups. And we show that by using parentheses. So for instance, if we showed in parentheses 9 plus 23, and then plus 7's on the outside, so 7, no, they don't want to be friends with 7. They're excluded. The 9 and the 23 are hanging out, that's it. They are associating. Now, if we were following the order of operations, we would need to do what was in the parentheses first, 9 plus 23, and then add 7. But what this property is telling us is we can change where the parentheses are. So instead of that, we could put 9 plus parentheses 23 plus 7. Because it makes more sense for the 23 and the 7 to be hanging out. Why? Because it adds up to 30, which is an easier number to work with. So that is one example of why you would use the associative property. Now this is obviously an example of an associative property of addition, but it works the same way if we were using multiplication. Okay? If we had 10 times 4 in parentheses, and then on the outside we had times 8, that's going to mean the same thing if we had 10 times, in parentheses, 4 times 8. Again, the parentheses are just telling you what to do first in order of operations. Notice that the order of the numbers did not change. That is another property. So this property, associative property, is only the parentheses changing. Who is hanging out together? Who is associating together? Okay? So, speaking of change in the order, that is another property that we should all be familiar with, and that is called the commutative property. Commutative. And it is also of addition and multiplication. Commutative. Commutative property of addition and multiplication. I want you to think about the first two letters of the word commutative, C-O, and we can think of change, order. This property is all about the fact that you can change the order of the numbers you're adding, or you can change the order of the numbers you are multiplying. So again, the reason that you would want to do this is to make it easier to add or easier to multiply. For instance, if we had 3 plus 6 plus 7, The order of operations would tell you to do 3 plus 6 first, and then plus your 7. It would be easier if we did 3 plus 7 plus 6, because 3 plus 7 gives you 10. Again, an easier number to work with. Okay? And we change the order. So associative is changing the parentheses, commutative is changing the order. And it works the same way for if we have multiplication. Instead of doing 1/2 times 5 times 6, because 1/2 times 5, that's 2.5, and then 2.5 times 6, that's kind of a pain to do. If we would instead do 5 times 6 first, and then do a half. 5 times 6 is 30, 30 times 1/2 is 15. That's a lot easier to do. So associative is changing parentheses, commutative is changing order. She said, wouldn't it be easier also you could do 1/2 times 6 and then times 5? Yes, definitely. All right, the next property that I'd like to talk about is the identity property. Now, the identity property of addition and the identity property of multiplication are different. So the identity property of addition, let's do that first. Identity property of addition. Identity property of addition. What is your identity? Who you are. And you should never change who you are for somebody else. So when we think about the identity property, we don't want to change who the number is. So what number could I add to 5 without changing 5? 0. So again, what the identity property of addition is saying is you can add 5 to any number, you can add 0 to any number without changing the value of the number. Thinking along the same lines, when you talk about the identity property of multiplication, the identity property of multiplication, let's say we have that 5 again. What number can we multiply 5 by and not change the identity? 1. So the identity property of multiplication says if you multiply a number by 1, you don't change the value of the number. We have 2 more. The next property is called the zero property of multiplication. The zero property of multiplication. Someone said it over there. What is it? Anything times 0 equals 0. Any number times 0 equals 0. All right, our last property today that we're going to talk about is called the multiplication property of -1. Again, the multiplication property of -1. And what this property says is if you take a number times -1, that it turns into a negative. It's the opposite, okay? It makes it the opposite. So anytime you multiply by -1, you're finding the opposite of that value. Couple examples of writing equivalent expressions. Writing equivalent expressions. You will have some problems similar to this on your assignment. For instance, if you had 8 plus parentheses 9m plus 4. We can't combine 9m and 4, can we? Because they're not like terms. So we could change our parentheses and also change the order, so it's associative and commutative, to make it so that our 8 and our 4 were together and our 9m was by itself. which would give us then what? 12 plus 9m, or you could even say 9m plus 12. All right, so again, you can change the order, you can change the parentheses. I want to do one like this, and then I'll turn you loose. 56ab over a. Do you know how to do a problem like that? Anytime you have something like that, you can cross out. If you have it on the top and the bottom, you can cross it out. So this is just going to be 56b. Yeah, it's really nice. So if you have, let me do one more. Can you simplify 32 over 8? 32 over 8 is 4, isn't it? And then x's are gone too. So yes, 4y. All right.